This video is brought to you by the No Fear community.
Alf Rehn is a professor at Akademi in Turku and also a popular speaker. Welcome, Alf. What can you tell us about your background?
My background? Well, I was the nerdy kid who somehow ended up in a business school and thought, well, this is strange. Read a lot, not necessarily all business. Wrote a lot, not necessarily all business. And through some weird circumstances found myself at the tender age of 31 as a fully tenured professor. Realizing that that was not the smartest thing you could do, I then spent the following 8 to 9 years traveling around the world, meeting business people, sitting in think tanks, and generally being a nuisance. So I guess I'm part of the older digital cowboys, those digital cowboys that learned to ride with a Spectrum 48K and now look at the new generation coming up and seeing both the errors we also did and some pretty exciting new stuff.
You have done a lot of research on leadership, and No Fear is also a book about leadership and how it's changing. How would you say leadership is changing in the age of digital cowboys?
Well, leadership is a tricky thing because, of course, it has both changing and unchanging parts. I think in part, of course, there's always eternal themes to leadership. But at the same time, what we're seeing now is kind of an opening, a radical reimagining of what leadership actually means and what a leader actually looks like. We always assume that leaders lead either from the top or from the front line. Now we're starting to see that leaders can emerge from almost anywhere. We're starting to see temporary leadership. You're a leader as long as somebody follows your hashtag. We're starting to see leadership defined in peer groups rather than hierarchical groups. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening, but I don't think we should get caught up in that we've already seen what the new kind of leadership is. What we're seeing now are the first shivering symptoms of a new kind of leadership, and it's an exciting journey to be on.
Are there differences between the corporate world and the academia in how they are reacting to this change?
Academia is always 10 years behind. That's kind of both the benefit and the problem of academia. Academia hasn't really gotten on board. Most academics are really excited if they've learned how to use Twitter and Facebook. And of course, theories are really slow-moving creatures due to long publishing cycles and the likes. But we're starting to see that new academics are very much like the new digital cowboys. They want to publish quicker, they want results rather than hierarchies, they want to do many things rather than the one career path. So yes, academia is embroiled in the same sea change as the rest of the world, if with certain restrictions and certain, let's just call them breaking individuals.
How do you think business education should change?
It's an interesting thing because maybe we're actually at the point where business education should be scaled down to more basics. Not necessarily scaled down as in be shorter, but maybe we need to, now that things are changing so quickly, maybe we shouldn't be that caught up in trying to always teach the latest thing, but rather go back to the classic themes, the eternal themes, the things that don't change so much. A modern leader coming out into the business, his knowledge has already been partly become outdated. And maybe we shouldn't get caught up in this Red Queen race where no matter how fast you run, you're always stuck in the same place. So we need to change, yes, but not necessarily by becoming quicker. We actually might change by becoming a little slower, a little more ponderous, going back to the classic themes.
One of the themes in No Fear is how technology is changing leadership with the advent of the digital cowboys. How is the academia reacting to this change? Or what you're saying, is it that the academia should ignore technological change?
No, it shouldn't ignore it. It's always stupid to ignore things. But it shouldn't necessarily get caught up in always being in the front line of something where nobody can ever stay in the front line. The problem in academia when it comes to leadership and technology is that these things tend to be studied by very different kinds of people. Leadership researchers tend to be very human-focused, also pretty individual-focused, tend to want to look for great general statements. Technology researchers kind of get off on the buzz, on the quick happenings, on the networks. So they tend to be pretty far from each other. And I think that in order to really understand leadership in an age of this kind of technology, we need to both have some kind of grasp of the technology, but fundamentally we need to think, what does leadership mean when it's read through the technologies? We need an audience theory of leadership more than we need a new kind of theory of what a leader is, because I think that in the age of technologies, quickly changing, quickly mutating, maybe the very idea of a leader is becoming obsolete.
So what you're saying is we don't need leaders anymore.
We may start to see a development in which the classic idea of the leader is becoming obsolete, or it's at least being scaled down. The notion that there needs to be one man, and it's always a man, isn't it? Controlling, grasping, having all the threads in his hands. That might be changing something far more organic, something more fluid, temporary leadership, peer leadership, group leadership. We may start to see a development where a very old hierarchical idea is at least taking some shots below the bow line, at least in some ways changing. And the really interesting thing to follow now is, are we seeing the twilight of the leaders?
Another thing that's changing is that the digital cowboys are much less motivated by money than previous generations of leaders. What do you see as the main thing motivating them?
Well, the notion has been that digital cowboys are motivated by having something exciting to do, something that is meaningful to them, and something that can bring them respect, honor, regard in their peer groups. And I don't actually think that money is completely unimportant to digital cowboys. It might be less of a status marker than it was, but it's still always there in some sense. I think that the main motivation here will be, in a sense, building your own identity. Will people recognize me as having done something exciting? Will people like what I do? Will people show regard to me? And this also is actually scaling back to a very old notion of what it means to be successful. Earlier, I'm talking 500, 1,000 years back, you weren't important because you had a lot of money. That was actually a little gauche, a little bourgeois to see that as important. You wanted respect. You wanted to be honored. You wanted that people looked at you and said, that is somebody I can trust. That is somebody who does great stuff. So the digital cowboys might actually be looking for some pretty archaic stuff, some pretty classic stuff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This video is brought to you by the No Fear community.